everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be creating a shadow box card and I want to show you how easy this type of card to create is. All you need is a couple pieces of cardstock. I have two pieces here that I have cut to 4¼ inches tall and 6½ inches wide. I'm using my scoring tool and I'm adding a score line at 1/2 inch and 1 inch on each end of my cardstock piece. So you can see here I did it on the first side, I flipped it over and I did the exact same score marks on the other side. And this is going to be where we connect our card when we have everything finished. So I'm going to do it on both the front piece as well as the back piece, which are both cut from white cardstock. So now once I have these scored, I can go ahead and start to work on the background of my card, which I want to look like an ocean because we're going to be creating an ocean scene. So for this, I've decided to use my Distress Oxide inks, and I'm going to do some ink blending on the background. I'll be using Tumbled Glass, Mermaid Lagoon, and Blueprint Sketch colors to create my water. And I love the Tumbled Glass because it's a really nice light blue, but it's still really saturated in color. So you get a lot of that blue on the paper when you add it. So I'm just using a regular ink blending tool and I'm starting at the top of my cardstock piece and I'm starting to apply the color. Now if you go over the score lines, it's not a problem. You're not going to see those once we fully assemble the card. But you do want to make sure that you fully cover the area in between the two inside score lines, since this is the area you'll see once the card is fully assembled. So I'm just going to speed through this part, but I am going to leave all of the ink blending in so you can kind of see how these colors blend together. The Distress Oxides are very forgiving, so they do blend really nicely. It looks kind of messy at first when you first start, but they really move on the paper and really blend nicely together. I like to go back and forth between the colors, which is what gives it that really nice smooth blend. Once you have the first color down and you bring in the second, you can kind of go back and forth with that first and second color, and then do the same with the second and third color. So don't be afraid to go back in with your other colors to get it really nicely blended. So I'm just finishing off here with a little bit of Mermaid Lagoon right in the center, and now I have a really nice pretty blend, and I have that dark color at the bottom and it kind of goes lighter as it goes towards the top. To add a little bit more texture and dimension to my water, I'm going to also add some water directly onto my panel, and since Distress Oxide inks react with the water, you can see that I'm getting this really cool splotchy effect in the background. I like a lot of it on this type of a scene since I am trying to make it look like water. So I did add quite a bit of water on my panel, and then I just used my paper towel to lift that extra water up, and then I'm going to set this aside to dry. Since it is quite damp, I don't want to really do much to it yet. I want to give it a chance to dry, and we'll work on the front of the card while we do that. So for the front, I'm going to die cut a window opening, and for this type of card, that's kind of the key to creating the shadow box look, is you want to have the front panel have something cut into the center. You could use an oval, a rectangle, a square, a circle, pretty much any shape you want. I decided to use the elegant rectangle stacks just because I love the design of this die cut piece here, and I thought it would look really nice with our ocean scene. And then once I had that die cut in the center, I'm just going ahead now and folding on my score lines. So I have my panel flipped upside down, and the first thing I did is I folded inwards with the first score line, and then I folded backwards on the second score line. And it kind of creates a little Z fold on the end there. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm first folding the entire piece inwards, and then I am folding the little smaller piece towards the outside. I have my bone folder here, and I'm using that to really crease my folds. When we get the card fully assembled, we're going to want those folds to be really nice and creased because that's going to help the card fold nicely together. Okay, so now that we have the two main parts of our card finished, we have the front and the back is still drying with all of that ink we added. I'm going to go ahead and work on my images. So I've already stamped these out onto some Neenah Solar White 110 pound cardstock, and I'm using my Copic markers to color them in. I'm not adding a lot of colors to the characters that are going to be in the water, mainly because I didn't really know which colors I wanted to do them, and I didn't want to do them blue since we're going to be putting them against a really bright blue background. So I decided to stay very neutral and do all of the coloring in some grays. So for the two dolphins, I used cool grays, and I added a little bit of dot detail on the backs of the dolphins just to make them look a little bit more textured. And then for the shark, I used warm grays and started with a really dark color against the bottom area of his top part of his body, just to kind of almost make him look black. But I didn't want him to appear super dark, so I did fade the color up as I went towards the top of his fin area there. And I just kind of went back and forth with my markers till I got a nice blend with that gray color. And then I finished it off by coloring in the inside of his mouth. I did start with a very light color. I believe this is R20. And then I ended up going in with an R22 and even a little bit of red to really deepen up that area. So you can see here I'm just finishing that off. And I also colored in the little water splashes as well as the hearts. I did quite a few of those, and I ended up only using one water splash on the finished card. It was the only thing that I really liked with the scenes, so even though I had them all there, I ended up only just using one of them. Okay, so now that we have our images colored, our background is now fully dry. I'm doing the same thing as I did to the front of the panel, but this time I'm folding towards the inside of the panel on the front and then folding that other piece outwards. And what's going to happen is these are going to sandwich perfectly together, and we're going to be able to add adhesive on the very end piece of each of those sides, and that's what's going to hold the card together. I did decide to add a little bit more detail to the water. I wanted it to look like the sun was kind of shining down into the water. So I laid the raised stencil directly over top of my background, and I'm using the tumbled glass, which is the first color that we used for the water. And I'm just kind of very carefully applying that over the stencil. And you can see we are left with those really cool rays kind of down in the water, just giving the look of light kind of shining in. I also have a little piece of cardstock here that was die cut with the Wave Edges dies, and I'm using the same two colors, Tumbled Glass and Mermaid Lagoon, and I'm adding color to this piece as well. And this is just going to be a piece that we're going to add to the front of the card directly behind the frame that we created. Now the last thing I need to do before we start to assemble everything is I need to color in my little ocean pieces here. All of the pieces are die cut from the Under the Sea Dynamics, and I like to cut them from white cardstock so that I can use my Copic markers to color everything in. I love being able to add a little bit of shading. It just makes them look a little bit more dimensional and not so flat as you would get if you cut them from colored cardstock. So I'm just going through and I'm coloring all of the pieces. I am going to end up with more than I'm going to use here, but I always like to do a little bit more rather than having to stop while I'm working on the card to cut or stamp more images. So I'm just finishing off here with the two larger rocks, and then I have two smaller rocks as well that I'm also going to color, and then we can start to assemble our card. I'm going to use liquid glue to assemble most of the pieces. I find it really quick and easy, and I love this glue. It has really great hold, and it allows me to kind of move everything around a little bit before I decide exactly where I want it, which is nice for a scene like this when you're not entirely sure where you want all of the elements to go. So the first thing I did was I added my little wave piece since we needed to add that directly behind our frame. And now I'm just going to kind of keep putting the top piece over the back piece to figure out spacing so I can figure out where I want all the elements to go. So I'm just going to quickly go through adding these on here. I did add one of the larger rocks and one of the little grass seaweed pieces on the very edge there. I'm adding a couple of the greenery pieces to the center, and I'm just kind of tucking those underneath of the frame so that they're in front of that water piece, but that they're kind of down underneath the frame as well. I decided to have one of the dolphins on the outside of the card and then have the other dolphin as well as the shark on the inside. I just didn't feel like there was enough space on the inside to have all three of them, so I loved how it turned out by having one on the outside. Once again, I used liquid glue and added it to the back of my images, and I just have the frame piece kind of laying over top so I can figure out exactly where to position those characters. I also added one of the seaweed pieces into the background as well, and it kind of disappears behind the frame when we put the card together. Now I wanted to have a floating water splash on the card, so what I'm doing is I'm adhering the card together now, but before I fully sandwich it together, you can see that I laid that acetate piece directly in that glue. And what that's going to do is it's going to hold it in that area that we're going to adhere the card together, and it's going to allow it to kind of stick out into the window opening. Now when I first put this in, this is actually a little bit too long, so I ended up pulling it out of there and just kind of trimming a little bit off with my scissors and then tucking it right back in there. I did it really soon after I had added the glue, so it was still kind of wet, so I was able to remove it. So just kind of close it like I'm doing here once you have that glue initially in there, and if anything is kind of not where you want it, you should be able to kind of move it and position it where you do want it. And because of this, I do recommend using liquid adhesive to adhere the card together, just because it gives you a little bit of wiggle room so that you can kind of move stuff around and you can nicely line up these two edge pieces. You do want everything to be perfectly lined up because that's what's going to allow you to kind of open and close the shadow box portion of the card to make it a little bit more dimensional. Okay, so now that we have both sides glued together, I can go ahead now and finish off the card. The first thing I'm going to do is add one of the little rocks here directly behind that wave. So I added some of the liquid glue on the very bottom front of the rock, just positioned it in place and pressed down to adhere that on. And now I'm going to go ahead and stamp our sentiment. So I've stamped the sentiment onto black cardstock with Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink. And now I'm adding white embossing powder over top. I use my heat tool to set the embossing powder, and then I die cut the sentiment with my Skinny Strips Dynamics to give it a nice finished banner look. I'm once again using liquid glue and I'm adding it to the card front, and I liked having it positioned there right above the rocks and the seaweed at the bottom right hand corner of the card. And now I'm just adding some finishing details to my scene. I have my glitter pen here that I'm adding to the dolphins as well as the shark. And now I have a white gel pen to add some highlights to all of the different characters as well as adding some dot detail to the water. I did also add some clear droplets to the water. I just love the look of them. Anytime I'm doing any type of water scene, I just really think that it adds to the overall look. So I'm just finishing up the white gel pen detail, and once I have that finished, our card is complete. So we have this really cool shadow box card where we have the water droplet kind of attached on the side of the card so that when you open it, it actually moves that water droplet. So you could have a lot of fun with this and add all kinds of things on acetate pieces that will actually move on the card. I hope you got some ideas in today's video on ways that you can create shadow box cards. Once you've created one of them, they are super easy to do, and you could do all sorts of different scenes inside of them. All of the supplies I've used are listed in the video description below. As always, I appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Thanks so much for watching.